great segue into talking about what FC, facilitated communication, versus S2C is. So in the 90s, there was a form of AAC that had become popular. I think it was also the late 80s, early 90s, called facilitated communication. And what it proposed and the method that it used was that the individual who was non-speaking had some type of motoric planning hump that they couldn't get over. And in order to get over that hump, somebody had to touch their elbow, their shoulder, their wrist to be able to move it towards a keyboard and touch the letters. The issue that became, and this is what we were taught in grad school, and this is the stance that ASHA had on it, which is the governing body for SLPs, is that there were several cases of abuse that had become alleged due to or through people who had been using facilitated communication. And in investigating those abuse claims, they discovered that the person who was making the message was not the non-speaking individual, but rather the facilitator who had been subconsciously moving their arm towards the letters. And there was a research study that was done where they showed the facilitator one image and they showed the non-speaking communicator another image. And the results of that study were every time the message that was typed was what the facilitator saw and not what the communicator saw. So that leads us to S2C, which is a much more recent development, which is using some of the styles of FC, in which there's a facilitator holding a letterboard, which is usually plastic, usually capital letters, all on one thing or all on one board. And it has the non-speaking communicator holding a pencil, touching towards the board. And they do say on their website they do use some prompting at the elbow, wrist, shoulder, whatever, while they're teaching it. But then they hope to fade that. But there's still somebody holding the board. And once again, they are going on the guise, or their claim is that this style of AAC helps to relieve something called motor planning deficits or motor planning issues within the person who is non-speaking. And the issue with that is, or at least my critique of S2C is that it's really hard. Have you ever tried to read a menu that somebody else was holding at a restaurant and you're like, give me that, I can't read it. It's really hard to track your eyes and then track your head with that and track your core with that. So it's really not that much better for motor planning. Anyways, that was kind of the pathway that led us to S2C, which is there's once again a facilitator who's holding a board and once again a non-speaking communicator who is touching said board. So.
Okay. That's a great summary. Is it fair to say that S2C has less physical facilitation than FC? Is it like a toned down version of FC?
They say so.
I was going to say, I think that kind of depends on who you asked or who you ask. And to kind of validate, I guess, Zach, what you were saying earlier, that it was kind of hard for you to tell that another person was involved in this communication method at all. I think, not to assign malice, of course, to any group here, but I do think that's a little bit on purpose because of the reputation that facilitated communication has. So I know in the telepathy tapes, they make a point several times to say, now, no one was touching these kids. No one had their hand on their wrist, or no one was touching their hands or elbows or anything. But what they're not saying is that someone was holding the board. So there is still room for facilitator interference. And in the kind of the S2C community, especially online, there are a lot of reasons or justifications as to why this has to occur, why this has to take place, but it's a really big sticking point for the validity of spelling to communicate as a legitimate form of AAC.